Alright folks, so here we are with our first lecture here. Let's take a look at our syllabus to make sure you have the right one. So here we are, morality and justice. And it doesn't matter which of my sections you're in, the syllabus is now the same for online classes. And so if you go back to the announcement with the new syllabus, let me put my glasses on here, make sure I can read this stuff. And so if we do that, we can see that there's a morality and justice syllabus up here. Open it up, make sure we're on the same page and we're looking at the same thing. Here it comes. Alright, so this is the Microsoft Word opening up here. See how that goes. And, nice slow speed on us here. And what are you going to do? Sometimes it takes a moment to open a file, particularly if your internet connection at home is not the best, as mine is not. Alright, so here we are. Let's go ahead and go down the PowerPoint, not the PowerPoint, but let's make it a little bigger, and go down this a little bit. And this is actually like an iPad as well. There you can see how the grades are made up, and what really has changed is in-class activities that are now online discussions. So there'll be 5 of those worth 10 points. And if you go down a little bit more, here's where online instruction begins. You've taken the midterm. I've started grading them. By next week, that should be all up there. Earlier grades are already up there and posted. And what you see here is that there will be a discussion 1 posted on the 3rd. And it will actually involve the material I'm giving you today, which is chapters, a couple classes back in the reading, chapters 2021 on the death penalty, and chapters 27 through 31, which are later in this week. So there'll be 2 lectures that go with that discussion. Then we'll have quiz 2, which will just be on post-midterm stuff. I will post it on the 6th. I'll give you a few days to complete it. Instead of everything online, I give you post it and give you a 3 or 4 or 5 day window. Easter break is still apparently a thing, so we just want to introduce new material than that, and the rest of the syllabus should be pretty straightforward. So let's minimize that and take a look at our content, which is still the same, course content. You can still go to the course web page, and just a quick reminder on the course web page that your paper guidelines, which are due at the very end of the semester, very end of finals week, are up there, and you can already start looking at those if you need to, or you can wait a little bit. We still have some time. But what matters for us today is our PowerPoint discussion. And here you can see it. Let's see. I believe it's just called the death penalty, but let's see if I'm right. It might be worded a little differently. Yeah, I think it's the crime and punishment one. I was once called the death penalty, but I revised the slide. So, crime and punishment here. Let's open that up, and I'll just sort of walk you through the slideshow. It's coming. You can see a little box down there. Maybe you can't see it. Maybe only I can. But it's coming, a little PowerPoint. There we are. And should be opening when done, so it should open any second now. Again, on my internet connection, sometimes the speed is not ideal here. So let's see what we can do. Here we go. So just going to take a look at a few things there, and arguments for and against. And all right, I basically want to go with the arguments here. I'm also going to send you a couple of other videos. One that contains an argument against death penalty, and one that contains arguments both for and against it, advocates and opponents. Okay? So, but those videos will go with our discussion, and will follow this lecture. So let's first go back to this image that we actually used in a earlier class, and that is Lady Justice, the Greek idea of Lady Justice being blind. Earlier, when we discussed John Rawls and the libertarians, we talked about the scales Lady Justice is holding there, distribution. But now we're going to talk about that sword, retribution. So theories of punishment have to do with criminal punishment. How should we decide to deal with those in our societies who have committed crimes, things that are punishable? What is a crime, and what should a punishment be for a crime? That's what we're looking for here. So there are basically, if you think about it, three big questions. Why, when, and how should government punish people? And I'm thinking that the main idea is that the government should do the punishing because you don't want vigilante justice. That's the common view. But vigilante justice would be, you wrong me, I punish you. I wrong someone, they punish me. And that can quickly escalate into blood feuds, like you read in Romeo and Juliet, or actually happens to this day in Albania, for example, where there are people who can't leave their homes because of blood feud. Their family is part of a blood feud. All right, so we presume that it is government who punishes the criminal, not private individuals. We don't want to privatize punishment. So why is government to punish is the answer to that one. It's better to have crimes punished by state power than to have retribution in the hands of the private citizens. When should somebody be punished? Well, there's a lot of debate here, but let's move this little video a bit so you can read better. If a person commits a deed that is harmful enough to other people, or to the social order, or perhaps to themselves, they may be punished by the state. And that seems right. Now, of course, you can debate about when is a deed harmful enough that the state should punish it. I think Mill's principle of liberty is, in many ways, pretty useful here. My freedom to swing my arm ends at the other man's nose is one way of expressing that. In other words, people should be allowed to do whatever they want until we're talking about truly harming another person, which traditionally has been understood as force, theft, or fraud. It's a whole other debate about hate speech and things like that, but that's the most basic idea. And so why and when, actually, there's a lot of agreement among philosophers. What we really need to focus on is how. How does the state go about doing it? And there are several theories. My PowerPoint is not wanting to work here, so let's try again. There we go. So the big theories are things like deterrence. Deterrence. You deter, punishments deter crimes is the logic here. And as you can see by the image that is up here, John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham, both utilitarians, were both advocates of the deterrence theory of punishment. They're basically saying, look, if you are a deterrent theorist, you say there's one and only one reason a state can punish criminals, and that's so that people won't commit crimes. If there's a penalty for force, theft, and fraud, then I won't commit those acts, or at least most people won't. That's the view. So that's why you punish criminals, so they won't commit crimes. And clearly, part of the reason that we have criminal punishments is to deter crime. You think of it right now, a number of states, California included, have said, don't go gather in public places. There's this horrible virus, and we need to practice social distancing. And they find that some people don't care about that advice unless there is, say, a fine or a citation. And so people are being cited and fined. And the idea is that we will deter them from gathering if the fine is big enough. That's deterrence. Now, also, this doesn't just deal with when punishment is appropriate. It's what punishment is for, but what the punishment should be. And if you're a deterrent theorist, usually most utilitarians are, the appropriate punishment is whatever deters the crime, no more, no less. Right? So whatever is just sufficient enough to deter people from stealing, that's the only punishment you need. If you go more severe than that, that's not going to work. That's overkill. Right? The only justification is deterrence, so whatever you need to deter, no more, no less. The second big theory, which is most famously associated with Immanuel Kant, is retribution. Okay, retribution. So, what is the retributive theory of punishment? Well, according to Kant, deterrence is not an adequate reason for a crime. And his argument's pretty good. Deterrence alone doesn't ask whether the person deserves the punishment. Yeah, punishing person X might deter crime, but what if they don't deserve it? What if they didn't commit the crime? So you have to ask a prior question, according to Kant, before you ask the question about deterrence. And that prior question is, do this person deserve the penalty? That does seem right. So Kant takes this further and says deterrence has no role in punishment. All that matters is, does the person deserve it? And deterrence might also be a factor, but surely desert is right. Kant's probably wrong to throw out the baby with the bathwater when it comes to deterrence, but he's certainly correct that retribution is the main point. What that means is this: a criminal should be punished simply because they committed a crime and not for any other reason. You're punished because you deserve to be punished. You did something which deserves to be punished. Consequences don't matter to Kant. So for Kant, it only matters that the person deserves to be punished, not whether it deters crime or has any other effect. So also, Kant very famously gave you this sort of an eye for an eye notion of justice. He didn't invent it, but he very famously argued for it. An eye for an eye, the principle of proportionality, the lex talionis. The punishment must fit the crime. And what that means is not that you do to the person precisely what they did. That would be kind of silly. We'd have to, for example, burn down the home of an arsonist. That's not going to work. But what he means is the severity of the punishment needs to match, needs to be in proportion to the severity of the crime. That's what he means. Okay? So, for example, you shouldn't be executed for speeding. Likewise, you shouldn't be given a $55 ticket for manslaughter. The severity of the punishment should match the severity of the crime. Okay? And in general, that's correct. The only question is, what do you do with that? How does the severity of the punishment actually come to match the severity of the crime? How do you figure that out? And the third major theory, Aristotle actually seems to have held this theory, and many modern thinkers do, particularly people who work in psychology and neuroscience. And it had its heyday among people who were concerned with prison reform in the 1960s and 1970s, where you don't call them prisons, you call them correctional facilities. And what you do is you provide people in prisons tools for bettering themselves. You teach them a craft, you make them take classes or join the choir, or things like that. And on this view, the point of punishment is not primarily to deter crime. That might be part of its point. And it's not really about whether the person deserves it or not. The point of what we might call punishment, here not even really called punishment, maybe just correction. Punishment is kind of a misnomer for this theory. Is that the criminal is a kind of a sick person. There's something wrong with their brain, or they had a terrible environment and upbringing, and what they need to do is to be reformed, be restored, to have what is wrong with them corrected. Okay? So we don't punish, we reform them. And that's the rehabilitation theory. And it's sort of the odd man out. If you look at the first two, deterrence and retribution can go together. You can say, look, I'm punishing that guy because he deserves it, but also it'll deter others from doing what he did. It'll deter others from doing what he did. So this theory doesn't really take effect either of those. It's more about how do we restore this person to healthy flourishing in a just society. How do we make them productive members of the social group and not simply criminals as they are. Okay, so those are the three theories. And the death penalty is what chapters 20 and 21 of your book are about. Okay. And punishment is, I guess the best reason to focus on the death penalty if you want to evaluate these various theories of punishment is that the death penalty is perhaps the most severe punishment. It's certainly the most irrevocable. You put a person to death and they're dead. That's over. Okay. Others might find life in prison as severe, or torture of some kind, which we do not legally sanction, of course, in modern democracies. So, but the death penalty is a great way to test which of these theories of punishment we really believe, and which is kind of the best here. So let's take a look at the arguments for and against the death penalty. And you'll see how these different theories, these three different theories we just went over, these theories of criminal punishment, clash with each other. So here we go. First, some facts about the death penalty. Now, these facts are, by themselves, they don't argue anything or prove anything. Okay? So keep that in mind. They're just facts. So, in the United States, which is what we'll focus on, for a number of reasons. For one thing, we're one of the very few modern liberal democracies that has the death penalty. Almost all of Europe, Latin America, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, Japan. Most countries in the world no longer have a death penalty, and certainly most economically and democratically advanced and democratically structured governments do no longer have it. That doesn't mean we should or shouldn't. That's just a fact. But in the United States, the vast majority of executions occur in the South, and in particular in Texas, Oklahoma, and Virginia. Mostly Texas. Texas has a lot of executions, far more than anybody else combined in this country. 31 states, and now I believe this is actually a little bit old, this power, I think it was 32 or 33, have the death penalty. I'm sorry, the other way around. And I believe it's only 28 or 29 states that now have the death penalty, and about 21 don't. Of the states that have the death penalty, many have not executed a person in decades. So only a handful of states regularly employ it. Again, nearly all of Europe, most of Latin America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, they've all abolished the death penalty. That doesn't mean we're right or wrong to be different. That just means that we're different. And this part here is, I don't know, I guess I would want to say, make of it what you will. But the vast majority of the executions in the world occur in only 5 countries. China, by far the leader. They kill a lot of people. Saudi Arabia, same kind of problem. Iraq, Iran, and then the United States. So it's kind of an odd list to be on. Those countries are not known for being respectful of human rights or having fair and just legal systems. And there we are on that list. Does that necessarily mean something's wrong? Not necessarily. We are way behind the other guys in executions on that list, and perhaps we execute people for better reasons, but that remains to be seen. We'll have to investigate that. All right, going forward now that we have a few facts at our disposal. So let's just look at the arguments. Before we do, by the way, with few exceptions, the death penalty now carried out wherever it's allowed in the world or in the United States is usually lethal injection. Right? So it's lethal injection, and you kind of get the idea behind that. You're trying to not be cruel and inhumane. Where the Constitution says cruel and inhumane punishment, cruel and unusual punishment, must not be allowed. And so there was a period between 1972 and 1976 where the Supreme Court ruled that things like the electric chair or the gallows were cruel and unusual. And so there was a ban on the death penalty. But when lethal injection became the norm, the Supreme Court reversed and the death penalty returned. There were 4 years when we didn't have it. So keep in mind, we're mostly talking about lethal injection, although some states do allow some different methods of execution, in some cases if the person requests it. So let's go on. All right, so one argument for the death penalty is deterrence, and let's kind of pay special attention to this one. The first premise here is that the most effective deterrent against murder is the death penalty. And it just basically goes off of a sort of an intuition that people are more scared of dying than anything else, and so the fact that you will be punished for this crime, you will be put to death for this crime, is got to be the scariest thing. Okay? So since, on this view, it's a deterrent theory, the purpose of punishment is to deter crime, we should have the death penalty for the most severe crimes, like first-degree murder. That's the basic argument. There are some objections to it, and they're pretty good. One comes from Immanuel Kant, who says, well, look, I don't know where I went there, but look, deterrent alone is not sufficient to justify punishment. That goes back to Immanuel Kant. And what that's basically doing is saying, look, if it was just deterrence, you could execute an innocent person and have that effect. That's not right. The person's got to deserve it. So we have to ask the first question, does the person deserve it? There is another objection to this line of argument, and that's this. It's not true that capital punishment is needed for the full deterrent effect. Life in prison is a pretty bad sentence. If that won't stop me, why would the death penalty? I didn't think life in prison was bad enough. And that's a fair point. Right. Now you could debate this, and Louis Pojman in chapter, I believe, 21 of your book does try to argue against this. But here's the part about it. There isn't strong evidence that the death penalty is actually a deterrent. If it were obviously a deterrent, you would say places that have the death penalty have less crime. That does not turn out to be the case, not internationally or within the states. There is no, it doesn't look like this. This state has more executions, or has the death penalty, therefore they have less violent crime. Nope, there's no such correlation. Also, how do you measure deterrent? How do I know how many people have not murdered someone because they would get the death penalty? Which is, if you think about it, an odd way to think. Well, I'd kill that guy, but I don't want the death penalty. Maybe some people think like that, but I don't suspect most of us have not killed because we've had that reflection. I suspect most of us are not killers. So keep that in mind, okay? Also, again, since you can't really measure a negative, we don't know how to measure whether or not people have not killed because they have this deterrent. So we can't prove that it's a deterrent. So that argument in favor of the death penalty, it does not seem to me works. Okay, let's go on. Retribution is a bit of a better argument, and this is the Kantian position. The death penalty is all about punishing the person because they deserve that punishment. Right? So look at this. The lex talionis, eye for an eye, principle of proportionality is just, if you commit a crime, you must be punished in proportion to that crime. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. Okay? The only proportional punishment for murder is to take the murderer's life. So we must execute the murderer. You can see there's a bit of a typo here. I have execute the murderers, like is something. But it should be murderers, plural. I'll fix the typo later. So we must execute the murderers. We must execute them. The only thing that would... it's easy to kind of see the logic here. All you have to do is take some horrible killer, somebody who has committed brutal murders, tortured people to death, maybe repeatedly, like a serial killer. Maybe even if you want to do somebody who has brutally murdered children. Almost all of us will feel, yeah, that guy can die. That guy deserves it. And there's no reason that we shouldn't just destroy such a wretched monster. Just look up your true crime stories and you'll find some crimes so hideous. Pretty quick, too. That you'll probably feel, yeah, that guy, just kill him. Okay? And the argument for retribution is kind of based on that. Okay? There are some objections, of course, as there are to everything else. One objection might be whether or not we really have free will. There are a lot of studies that do seem to suggest that what we are is largely the result of our genetics and environment, and that this is particularly true for violent offenders or repeat violent offenders. Their amygdalas are different than ours. They look a little different, and that's associated with violence. In some cases, most cases, violent offenders have had extremely broken and abusive childhoods. They come out of areas of violence and poverty and broken homes, abusive families. So there are a set of environmental and genetic factors that do seem clearly different for people who commit violent crimes, particularly repeatedly. And you might ask the question, look, given that horrible background, are those lousy genetics, or the combination of both, does this person genuinely have free will, or are they at the mercy of a bad break? Doesn't mean you wouldn't put them away, but you couldn't hold them responsible in the sense the retribution argument wants. Right? You lock them up for their own good and ours, but you would be more humane to them, understanding that they didn't really have a choice. Now, we may or may not believe that, and that's, of course, a highly debatable claim. Although it is worth taking seriously, it's not an obviously stupid claim. And the second one is more interesting. Is premise 2 right? That the only proportional punishment for murder is to take the murderer's life? Isn't life in prison? Or maybe a certain number of years in prison. Maybe that's appropriate. Remember, you don't... The principle of proportionality doesn't mean you do exactly to the criminal what they did. Otherwise, you'd have to pickpocket a pickpocket, and that's just silly. No. What are you going to do for the shoplifter? Shoplift from their house? I mean, so you punish them into the severity matches. You don't do the exact same thing. So is killing the killer really what proportionality requires, or perhaps requires something other than that? And of course, that's a debate to be had. But I will say, I think the retribution argument is intuitively very strong. All you have to do is think of some horrific murderer and the terrible things they did to innocent people, and particularly if it's children, and you'll want them destroyed. And you'll see the logic of this argument. We'll come back to it. Now, a rehabilitation theory, before we go on, doesn't really have a pro-death penalty argument because they're not in favor of the death penalty. You don't rehabilitate someone by killing them, typically. So they won't come up here, but you've got the retribution and the deterrence theory. All right. So arguments against the death penalty. Well, there's a couple of them. So what you can say, to begin with, is, look, two wrongs don't make a right. We can't kill people to show killing people is wrong. The idea there is, if murder is wrong, if it's wrong to take a human life, then it's also wrong for our government to take a human life to the death penalty. If we're saying the murderer doesn't get to kill somebody, then we don't get to kill them. You can't have a double standard. But I'm not sure that's right. I'm not sure this argument works because it kind of begs the question. Right? We are not saying that we would murder the murderer. We're saying we're execute the murderer, and execution may not be the same thing. We're saying, look, man, this dude is dangerous, and because this dude is dangerous, you should think very seriously about whether we should continue to allow him to exist. That's the view there. All right, going on. Here's the big one. This, to me, is the most serious argument against using the death penalty. You can describe some terrible killers to me, and I'll think they're no problem killing that guy. Problem is, the death penalty has to be an institutional operation or policy, and there's a lot of data. You can look this up fairly easily, saying that innocent people are sometimes, maybe as many as 1 in 25, so 4 out of 100, are sometimes wrongly executed. Okay? Sometimes innocent people are executed, and that isn't good. If they're innocent people are sometimes, even despite our best forensic science, which, by the way, forensics is not as good as we think it is. There are some loopholes in forensic science, which is something to keep in mind. But if sometimes we might accidentally execute an innocent person, that is a very strong reason against the death penalty. Now, you might say that it's worth it. Your article in favor of the death penalty that I assigned you does argue that it's better to accidentally kill a few innocent people than let all these guilty criminals who deserve to die go free. That does not seem right to me. It does seem that I would rather err on the side of not accidentally killing an innocent person, even if a terrible killer lives his life in prison rather than is executed. But that is the value judgment, and mine there happens to be different than the author's. Going on a little bit more, as I mentioned, you could claim that it is cruel and unusual punishment. Even lethal injections can go wrong, and the death can be painful and horrible. Now, of course, you think this might be a terrible, terrible killer, and therefore perhaps he deserves it. But could be an innocent person by mistake. It is possible to put those together, and the cruelty and unusualness. Also, you might say, look, I know this guy was awful, but do I want to be awful by killing him cruelly? Do I want to lower myself? It's not about him so much in this argument, it's about us. Right? Maybe he deserves to die a painful death, but do I want to give him a painful death? Do I want to become that kind of person? The kind of person that would delight in cruelly torturing another to death? So that's how that argument goes. I'll leave it up to you to decide. And then one more argument to consider before we look at some other videos. That the death penalty is carried out in a biased way. Okay? And in fact, it does seem to be the case. There's good data out there. Here's some of it. The race of the person accused and the race of the victim both seem to play a role in whether the death penalty is sought and whether the death penalty is measured out. In particular, the race of the victim. It does seem that if the victim is white, the death penalty is sought out and applied far more often than if the victim is some other race. And this doesn't mean that everybody involved is an overt racist, just that we have unconscious stereotypes that dictate how we act. And if race plays a factor, then it is an unfair system. It's not being meted out fairly. And it's not being meted out fairly. You have a serious problem. Also, the poverty or wealth, right? Rich people usually get out of the death penalty with a good lawyer. Poor people with a public defender can't. In other words, the death sentence, the death penalty is not carried out in a totally fair and objective way. And if it isn't, how can we have it? Now, of course, the response to this would be to say, well, you're right, it's carried out in this unfair way, so we shouldn't abolish the death penalty, we should carry it out in a fair way, in an equal way, not a biased way. Problem with that is our society is biased, like all societies are, and things like race and appearance and wealth play a huge role in our society, and it seems to be without a radical change, which may be impossible, on the societal level, you can't really change the bias carried out in the courts. That's true. Does that necessarily mean we can't have the death penalty? No, but I guess you might argue at least that we shouldn't carry it out anywhere near as often. Okay. There's a little bit more on this particular issue, and a bit more to be said. I want you to watch two videos after you're done watching this little oversight by me. One is a video by John Oliver. It's about 12 minutes long, and John Oliver uses some foul language. You might not like his political views, but that's not what this video is about. So, one video is by John Oliver arguing against the death penalty. You don't have to agree with it at all, of course. You can think he's totally wrong. The point is to note all the points of his argument. The other video, about 20 minutes long, gives both sides and looks at the data a little bit more. So I'm going to send those videos out below this one, and all of that should help you with your discussion. All right, well, I hope everybody is well, and you're staying safe, and doing what you can to enjoy yourself during these difficult times, and we'll be in touch again soon.